He is Director of Communications of the NPP. Mr. Agba, good morning. Welcome.
Good morning, sir.
Okay. Professor Godfred Bokpin, now one of the reactions after this demonstration on Tuesday, when the governor of the central bank granted this interview to the international business magazine, Central Banking, apart from calling or referring the protesters, describing them as doing hooliganism, sort of. He says the impairment of the bank's holdings of debt, I quote, which led to the losses was a conditionality from the IMF. Nobody at the Bank of Ghana forgive any debt. And we have that. We'll put that on the screen shortly. Will this statement suffice in any analysis and contextualization of the facts of where the Bank of Ghana finds itself in now?
Yeah, thank you very much. Certainly not. Certainly not. It cannot. And I think that the more Bank of Ghana tries to explain itself, the more they make the issues a bit more difficult for themselves, right? So I think the earlier we accept responsibility, the earlier we say that, look, we could do better and we should do better, it will be good for all of us. The reason I'm saying so has context in terms of the magnitude of the losses we are dealing with. But I have the confidence in putting this across because since 1992, you see a certain pattern of central bank activities that enables the deterioration in our economy. You see it. I could give you the data, but I will deal with this and then probably I'll support my argument with some historical data. What I am calling for, what I'm asking for, or I'm hoping for, is a certain nationalistic posture now that helps us to reform in a manner that prevents the occurrence of things like this. That's the only way Ghana's democracy can have a future. Because when it comes to net claims against the government or deficit financing, you see it across the two main political parties. It's very persistent, okay? It's very persistent. Mm-hmm. If you look at the data from 2008, in fact, actually, since Ghana started inflation targeting, unofficially March 2002, and then officially 2007, one key condition for the effectiveness of inflation targeting as a monetary policy framework is fiscal discipline. Mm-hmm. It's fiscal discipline. If you deny the central bank fiscal discipline, there is no way they can deploy monetary policy effectively to bring down inflation and engineer growth. Since 2002, March 2002, when we started inflation targeting, you see this pattern of deficit financing. In between 2008 and 2012, 2013, if you look at the level of deficit financing, essentially equivalent to money printing, it went up by more than 650%. From roughly around 1.5 billion cedis to a little above 11 billion cedis towards 2013. Actually, the current vice president, and this is what makes it a bit more interesting for me, and I'm saying that we can bury our political differences and look at Ghana from a common view that allows democracy to work for the ordinary Ghanaian. Our current vice president, when he was in opposition, gave a presentation on restoring the value of the city. We couldn't have gotten it better than that. In that presentation, our vice president was very clear. The implications of the deficit financing. At that time, the Bank of Ghana Act stipulated a deficit financing of 10% of government's previous year's fiscal revenue, total revenue. According to the data that the vice president then put forward, the deficit financing was in excess of about 45% in 2013, about 36% in 2013, and then 45% in 2012. Now, when we went to the Senchi consensus in 2014,
right,
one of the things that was identified was the deficit financing, because it's very clear. Once you do the monetization of the deficit, and currently we're also talking about monetization of the public debt, the unexpected inflationary pressures will no longer be unexpected. Okay. Now, in this current regime, unfortunately, and my considered view is that with the level of expertise and knowledge and understanding of our economy and the role the central bank has played, one would have expected that this current government would do far better. But it's actually been made worse. It's been made worse. So now look at it this way. In the wisdom of Parliament, given that the excessive financing of the deficit poses threats to the economy as a whole, Parliament puts in a clause, a limit to how far the central bank can go. Then it was 10%. The 16th IMF-supported program that kicked in from April 3rd, 2015 to April 2019 clearly identified the fiscal dominance of monetary policy. It's the same thing. It's just terminology we are changing. The fiscal dominance of monetary policy was one of the key drivers of the macroeconomic instability. What was the IMF's response? Zero financing of the deficit. So yes, one of the program objectives of that IMF-supported program was elimination of the fiscal dominance of monetary policy. I'm saying this so that we understand that as a country, we don't learn. We don't learn the lessons. The abuse only gets worse and worse and worse. Ghana has no future if we continue like this. So we did that. We came to the IMF implemented the zero financing. And in fact, it was one of the effective means of dragging down inflation. You eliminate the fiscal dominance of monetary policy, you curtail the deficit financing, you begin to see that inflation will head downwards. It's quite consistent with the theory. And here is validated by practice. Okay. Then in amending the Bank of Ghana Act, Parliament considered that, and we agreed with them, that as a country, we cannot do without some level of deficit financing from the central bank. We cannot. Because as a central bank, at some point, they also embrace a certain developmental posture. It's good. So we cannot keep to zero financing consistently. And from that perspective, we disagree with the IMF that zero financing is the way out. But it's a temporary measure. Yes, we can accommodate that. So Parliament reduced the deficit financing from 10% to 5%. So under the current regime, it's 5%. Now, look at the interesting thing. We understand shocks. We are not discounting that. In the wisdom of Parliament, in the the COVID-19 crisis, we all saw the wisdom in suspending the Fiscal Responsibility Act because the Fiscal Responsibility Act had also placed a limit on deficit creation. That's quite interesting, because it's the budget deficit that fuels borrowing, because the fiscal deficit is an indication of the borrowing requirement of the government. So in the wisdom of Parliament, reduce the budget deficit to 5% of GDP. Now, given the effect of COVID, Parliament suspended the Fiscal Responsibility Act. I am not a lawyer. It is not my considered view that Bank of Ghana could hide under that and print in excess of the 5% in their own act. Because if the mere suspension of the Fiscal Responsibility Act necessarily does not give Bank of Ghana the room to exceed or disobey its own act, we need to look at it from that perspective. Now, if you look at the level of fiscal, the deficit financing Bank of Ghana has done, in as much as there's scope for exceeding the 5%, you clearly see abuse.
Where is the abuse? Point it out to me.
In terms of the extent of the deficit financing and the lack of disclosure around it. And that does not lend to prudence, that does not lend to technical and professionalism. Now, look, if you look at the auditor's report, the audit opinion in the Bank of Ghana's annual report and financial statement, you will see clearly that the level of reservations that the audit firm had, you will see it. You just read through carefully, and then you see the level of reservation. Now, to say that is the IMF that prescribed this, is to say that it's not so much about the cure now, it's about the cause. It's about the cause. We worked ourselves into this. You know, the real thing we need to understand is that the more we do these things, the more we give the impression that we are incapable of managing our affairs as a country. Why would IMF give Bank of Ghana an advisor? For what reason? For what reason? So, from a professional and technical point of view, Bank of Ghana's performance was suboptimal. It's not good enough. Now, let me also give you some other insights here. The explanations the central bank gives, the more you look at it, the more you become a bit more concerned. If, as at the end of 2019, 2020, the central bank claims that if they had known that this economy was going to be here or head in this direction, they wouldn't have started the project. That is unacceptable for me. Look, the Ministry of Finance, their own internal debt sustainability analysis after 2019 clearly had indicated that Ghana's public debt was unsustainable. 2019, you can check. The IMF's final review as part of our exit of the 16th IMF program, it was clear in that IMF document that Ghana could not achieve debt sustainability, which was actually one of the program objectives. We could not. So we exited the IMF program with debt unsustainability still hanging on us. We were still placed at a high risk of debt distress. It's a country which we officially entered in 2014. As a medium debt carrying country, that was where we were placed. That position was affirmed. Look. So you see, the point is that there are certain positions that should take more responsibility than others. One of those institutions is the central bank. Now,
I see.
If, as at 2019, Bank of Ghana's own projections and the rest of them could not have warned us that this is where we're heading towards, then I think we should feel sorry for this country.
Why?
We should feel sorry for this country. Now, if you look at it from 2020, and it was very clear to us, this thing is not like we are boasting. Look, we did a presentation somewhere in 2019, and Bank of Ghana had a representation there. And when we did the public debt sustainability analysis, this was 2019, we demonstrated that Ghana was heading dangerously. This was 2019. The response from the central bank was that our model was wrong. We can go into that later.
They questioned your model.
Yes.
On the basis of what exactly? What was their own stance or explanation that the model you used in 2019 indicating that our debts were unsustainable was wrong, which eventually came to pass, by the way?
Because they said we had market access, they were using different model and all of that. Look, it was clear to us that it was just a matter of time and Ghana will be priced out of the market. The point that I'm saying is that, look, let's get serious. These numbers we are talking about here, if you lift the veil, is life. We are talking about life. We are talking about health. We are talking about social cohesion. We are talking about, so these things, we need to look at them from that perspective. Now, to say impairment, to say technical losses, look, Bank of Ghana's haircut is beyond just impairment, which is an accounting issue. There is a haircut on principal that is never going to be paid back. We should understand that the central bank is the lender of last resort. Now, Alfred, look at it this way. In this current debt crisis, it's not only Ghana. Other countries are also walking into it quite fast now, right? The IMF and the World Bank and the multilateral institutions have come together to say that their debt is not open for restructuring in accordance with best practices. Because as the IMF and the World Bank and the rest of them, they are the lender of last resort, and therefore their balance sheet should be preserved. Ideally, our central bank, within our context, is also the lender of last resort. What I'm saying is that if the central bank had been a bit moderate and prudent, the level of losses that would have been accommodated on their balance sheet would have been lower than what it is now. And that is where the emphasis should be. That as a central bank, they failed to protect that institution and to preserve its balance sheet. This posture over the years, that makes it look as though the central bank is too powerful to be accountable. I think we need to move beyond that. We need to move beyond that.
So also, as it stands now, the Bank of Ghana, if I'm reading the auditors, that's Deloitte's, the report you made specific reference to of the Bank of Ghana's financials as at the end of 2022, clearly the crisis is evident and they have to be recapitalized by government. Government is also facing its own crisis situation. What then happens?
That is precisely the point. You don't run your central bank to that point. You don't do that. From a technical and professional point of view, you don't do that. The way our constitution is designed, the way our democracy is designed, is such that there are certain institutions that have been guaranteed certain autonomy, right, to also act as checks and balances. It cannot be, and it should not be, that the governor of Bank of Ghana will literally be at the beck and call of the finance minister. There is supposed to be some level of separation between the fiscal and then the monetary, so that monetary policy doesn't become subordinate to fiscal. When it happens that way, there is no way, because it takes the two. These are the two main economic command centers, the fiscal and the monetary, to some extent also acting as checks and balances. That is why you see Bank of Ghana's Act. And I want to believe that if we were to seek an interpretation from the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court will be mindful to maintain the operational independence of the central bank. It's an institution, so that we don't, the politics of things doesn't cannibalize the central bank the way we have seen. Other than that, as a country, we cannot make progress. We cannot.